All right, so got to apologize twice here because one for being late. Nice campus, shed a few pounds on the way, so that's great. And the other is when Jesse invited us to speak, and thank you for the opportunity to do this. I actually did have somewhat of a PowerPoint prepared, but I did at least knock out a few concepts and some chicken scratch here. So apologizing for this, but this is more for me as opposed to putting you to sleep to kind of keep me on track. I run off on tangents, and I'll try not to do that. So my name is Kyle Scrimger, and I am a sustainaholic, and as much as I can be, and that's tough, and I think we all kind of face that challenge. So we've covered a couple of, or many facets of what sustainability is and how to address it, how certain groups, companies are doing their share and making money doing it, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. From ethical consumerism to energy efficiency, waste, water reduction across the board. And they all play a very important role. And there's many, many issues that we could go into. I mean, it was great on the ethics, fantastic standpoints and definitions, measuring metrics. The definition of sustainability I agree with from the 1987 Economic Development Forum. It's to provide the needs for the present without compromising the ability for future generations to meet their own needs. That's important. That matters. Your kids, they need a planet to live on. So the thing about it is we're just addressing it, and it's becoming more real. The unfortunate thing is we've leveraged the ability to suck a tremendous amount of resources out of the earth and pollute the skies to live the lifestyle we have today. This isn't a guilt trip. It's a fact, and now we're having to pay attention to it because our global population has hockey stick. I think these are all issues that we've talked about. 2.5 billion people in 1950. We're screaming past 7 billion today. Another 30% are going to be on this planet by 2050. That's a significant hockey stick, and we got to deal with it. And it is our responsibility, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, of the United States for the ability of what we have as a privileged union to do something about it. We have to lead. We have to come to the table. China doesn't. That's okay. I mean, it's not okay in terms of whatever, but it's important that we come to the table because they're just now being able to live this. Well, they took a 400-year sleep or a nap, but to have this lifestyle that we enjoy here. So the fact that we're entitled to it, it's important that we address it and come to the table. So what I was going to talk about is kind of the other facets of what I do in terms of sustainable, responsible investment management. If you can't tell, I'm not your mom and dad's investment manager or financial advisor. I have kind of a different mantra and live a different style, but so rather than going off of this, I'll probably just kind of talk about some of the things that you guys are going to have to address that our generation is fixing currently of what our parents had the ability and privilege to kind of utilize, and what we're going to do about it. So just a few points. Core capital management. In our investment management process, we incorporate environmental, social, and corporate governance criteria through the decision-making process when we look at global risks, global opportunities. Those are businesses that were addressed earlier. And how do you differentiate those? What do they mean? What are the measurements? What are the metrics? And it's tough. It's a really tough thing. Nobody's nailed it. And it's hard to define because of the greenwashing, because of the information or misinformation. It's only as good as the data that those guys are providing. It's the same thing with their financial reporting. All right, well, at least there's some standards that the SEC and accounting rules make them adhere to. But really, it's kind of a voluntary thing right now. And I think that there's going to be more and more, strict requirements. But at the same time, today to say, all right, well, this company is better than, B, the product is this, and it could be virtually the same thing, Colgate-Palmolive versus Procter & Gamble. And then you really have to kind of dig down and figure out what those metrics are. So it's progressing, which is encouraging, but at the same time, it's still a very difficult thing to do. So that's it. I don't want to go into too much process of what that is. You'll fall asleep on it in terms of the investment process. But some of the things that we're involved in, We're a certified B Corp. These are things that we not just walk, but we walk our talk. Is we've gone through the assessment, the process, had the certification, where we do a couple of different things in terms of being stewards of the environment, our social criteria, how we treat people, what we do with our diversity, and how we integrate with our entire process. And we actually incorporate that DNA into our corporate bylaws, so we adhere to it and live by it. The few examples: waste management in our area. They didn't have any recycling facility over there where I'm at, and so I was hammering them about 6 months of just calling, like, all right, fine, shut up, here's your bin. A couple weeks roll by, I sent it out there, and they're sending one truck, and it's stopping right where I'm at, and then taking off again out of the entire complex. I'm like, that's not real efficient. So called them up, and I'm like, well, at least can we spread the word and do a little bit of marketing campaign, so we've got a number of people that are in it. And so that was part of what the policy is, and part of our policies. The other is a few other examples in terms of what we do that I'm sure a lot of you guys as students do is, you bicycle around. I live in Huntington Beach. I commute once a week on my bike to Irvine, and that's also kind of a death wish, but it's something that we do, and it is a challenge, but just some of these small steps in terms of what you can do. Again, I'm just saying not what you can do, but some of what we do to take the initiative. We also are a member of 1% for the Planet. Again, we feel it's imperative that we give at least 1% of our revenues to environmental causes. We're proud sponsors of Jesse's organization as well, and we choose to do a policy organization and a investment analysis. Anyway, that's a little bit boring, but anyway, giving back and meaning it and doing your due diligence on it, and that's kind of how Jesse and I became friends and really loved their program. So. The other thing that we're involved in starting up here, and I can't wait to talk to these guys about it, is Slow Money. Slow Money is an organization that is separate than Core Capital or the Environmental Asset Fund, but that we manage, but is a movement, idea, and it goes back to what he was addressing in terms of where's your food come from, and there is actually opportunities in investing local and investing in food, farms, and fertility as if it actually mattered, and there is profit to be made there within reasonable terms. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. And also with the Clean Tech Open, which we co-chair in terms of just being in touch with what's going on in that environment. So quickly on what we believe, and this has been touched on again by a couple different people, but with ethics, I don't care if it's whether the ethical consumerism, with every dollar that you spend or invest, it has a global consequence. And you really, if you step back and think about it, I mean, you vote with your dollars, whether you're going to Walmart or you're going to go to the mom and pop shop. That matters. And a lot of the stuff that, from Clorox having to force to go and get their green products and some of the other lines out there, those were consumers that drove those choices. So it does matter. It's not like you don't have a say. And it's not just that, but it's also the voting process and procedure behind it. I mean, we get the governments we deserve. And speaking up, saying something, someone throws out their cigarette butt, honk the horn. I mean, do something about it. It's your ability to go and do something with it. And I think it is important, and I think it's going to be more and more addressed as we go along. So these are just some of the things of what we do personally, and kind of what we believe. Also to address, so we don't bash capitalism. I mean, Wall Street's, it's a rigged game. I live in that world, and it is a rigged game. And the interconnectedness with Washington, D.C., again, going back to voting, we vote and we're advocates on our, I don't know if anybody's ever seen a proxy vote. If you get those in the mail, if you are a shareholder, you've got the right, oddly enough, to actually vote for your board of directors and other resolutions that come on. In terms of, and there's been a number of them lately, in terms of disclosure on lobbying, et cetera. But as a shareholder, you have the right, you have an obligation as well to vote, because if Rex Tillerman at ExxonMobil is making a couple of $1 million in options additional than he should have, and that's not right, well, that's a bad example because they continue to make money hand over fist, but Dell or some of these other CEOs, I mean, you have a right to say something and you need to speak up. There are mechanisms and tools in place. It's just a matter of waking up and doing something. And so with Wall Street being a big game, back to that, and having to kind of operate in those markets, there is big social consequences. And I know I'm going off on tangents quite a bit. But look, a lot of people, and I think what is cool is that, and you guys as millennials will be addressing this, is that one of my parents was fortunate enough to have a pension plan. A lot of parents, the retirement ages, not by choice, are going to have to go further up, not just due to longevity in terms of the human race, but also because they're out of money. They didn't save right. The corporate pensions they're dying. They're going by the wayside, and that matters because there isn't going to be that security blanket. And a lot of the baby boomers that are coming on are going to soon find out that they don't have enough money to actually exist. The Social Security is not going to take care of it. That is in a certain degree of risk. 2035, they're kind of assuming. So there's all sorts of issues, and these are big social issues in terms of how are we going to take care of ourselves financially. And I think sustainability will address some of that, but these are big issues. Not to be doom and gloom. The cool thing is that you guys are going to be doing a lot of these technologies and taking a lot of these issues and policies and having to solve them, unfortunately. But it's going to be some really tremendous opportunities. So I'm more optimistic than I have been in the last 4 or 5 years. Again, on an economic basis, I think we're about 5 years out of this just demise. But when we flip and when we turn the corner and things brighten up again, sustainability is going to matter that much more, because cost cutting and the ability to say, look, we've trimmed out as much fat as we can under the guise of sustainability, which is very important, but the fat will be trimmed, and how much more efficient can you get without having to actually then grow and utilize and provide your shareholder value. So those are going to be issues, and I think a lot of it is going to come from entrepreneurs, and I'm hoping that we support a lot more entrepreneurs, and especially in our local economies. So again, I could go on, but I think that's about it. Thank you.
I'm actually pretty impressed. It's 8:13, and we wanted to talk for about an hour, and we started a little after 7, and nobody talks less than their allotted time. So well done, team. I hope there's a lot of questions. If there's not, I've certainly written a few down. Everyone had some really good insights. I know some of the speakers did not go into some of the things that they could have. Kyle sort of embodied it, just sort of cutting it short a little bit. I've had really extensive conversations with, now I can say 75% of the businesses on the panel, and I really, you guys with Sustainability Council, I love what you guys bring to it. Mike, you're Mike, right? Yeah, former military, and you bring a great perspective. And I like to say, I saw this thing a few years ago on recycling airplanes, and it showed me that the military is actually probably one of the best examples of recycling that you'll ever see. And I think that speaks out of necessity. The military has stood up and loudly said, hey, you know what, climate change is a reality, let's get with it and figure it out. Rather than hem and haw over a bunch of crap, like, let's deal with the real stuff. So I think that's awesome. Are there questions, please? Because if there's not, I'm going to just ask these guys questions, and I would rather you guys ask the questions. So we got one right here.
My question's for Matthew. I was wondering how effective it is for like a consumer going to a restaurant to ask questions like that, because I'm always kind of scared to ask them where the food comes from, because I don't really think that it matters. But as a chef, if your waiter comes back and he or she is just hey, they asked about our food and I got to tell them where we get it from, does that mean something to you? Would it mean something to someone who doesn't get it from local produce? How effective is our voice when we're just sitting at the table and not phone calling them and emailing them?
What a great question. I'll try to answer that the best I can in maybe 1.5 parts. There's a lot of chefs out there in Orange County that are doing wonderful things. chances are if you ask the server some difficult questions like that, they're going to be as white as a ghost. I'm not going to lie to you. They may or may not know what to say. Why I'm so passionate about this is for this exact reason. That I would love for all busboys, hostesses, servers, general managers, you name it, to be able to answer those questions with voice and passion for things that they're doing within their establishment to honor some of those questions that you asked. Can you do it? Yes. Should you? Yes. I mean, it's very difficult to be a front runner and to be a leader and to, be out there asking questions that you're the only one asking. But again, it gets back to the point of it's all happening right now. So if one of us doesn't stand up and yell at that guy who threw the cigarette out and hit your front window and he just washed your car, who's going to? We have to be that first person to ask and to answer those questions and to promote that. Where I think that there's a little bit more benefit in that is the more you know about where your food comes from or doesn't come from, I think that you're going to be able to better serve yourself in that and choose those restaurants and support those restaurants and go in there and say, hey man, this is way cool what you're doing. I so appreciate it. And that will affect change.
I'm going to piggyback on that. Yes, it does make a difference. I guarantee you that. And Derek Sabori is the Director of Sustainability for Volcom. They made these really cool 100% recycled flip-flops. He's actually speaking at the Sustainability Brands Conference, which is really expensive, the one I was telling you about earlier. He has a story about that at the Yard House, where he asked the server, what's the deal? Do you guys have any sustainably harvested seafood here? What's going on? And his friends were all like, dude, come on, man, we're just trying to eat. Server came back like 20 minutes later and said that he had talked to the chef and talked to the general manager. And it turns out, and I've kind of talked with some of the managers there, they're actually looking very seriously at adopting some of these practices because they do understand that it makes a difference. And again, I don't want to talk too much, but there's a great article, and I can email it to you if you want to disperse it, send it out to the crowd. NPR just did a story on Chipotle. I'm sure we all know Chipotle. Does anyone not like Chipotle? Try it again. So they got there like 4 people out of the whole crowd. The food with integrity is what they're pushing right now, right? And the gist of this article is that the owner of Chipotle they weren't selling their pork. And he went to a restaurant in Berkeley and he said the best pork chop of his life. Asked the owner of the restaurant what the deal was. He told him where he got the pork and said right then and there he made the decision, I'm going to start selling humanely raised, antibiotic-free, pasture-raised pork. It cost $4.50 per burrito at the time when he was selling his old pork. He had to jack the price up to $5.50. Sales skyrocketed. It's fundamentally imperative that consumers tell owners what it is that they want. Because as Kyle said, all of these guys have talked about, there's examples, from the Clorox, the Greenworks that they do, or whatever it is. It comes from consumer demand. So yeah, would ask.
With Chipotle, they're 51% owned by McDonald's. And they say they're outside the realm on sourcing within 50 miles. There's some washed out there.
There may be a little bit of washing on that. I don't necessarily know all the details, but if it's 51% owned by McDonald's, my understanding too is that they're not actually dictating what Chipotle does. But that should actually give more pause to the fact that, hey, it can make a difference in a company that's 51% owned by McDonald's, right? The local thing too is it can be difficult to ascertain, in terms of food, but I'm going to just stop and ask if there's another question.
I have a follow-up food question. Yeah, let them do it.
The next door neighbor of the girl that asked the question.
This is a question for Mel.
Yeah, the question was, do we consult before construction? And yeah, it's very common actually to consult before construction. That's really when you want to consult. If you're talking about new construction, if you're talking about a remodel, yeah, you want to consult as well. You may have architects, engineers, interior designers. They're all coming together on the table or to the table to actually create something. So you want to actually make sure everyone's on the same page, create the game plan, and kind of move forward from there. So yeah, it's very common.
Do companies reach out to you, or does your company reach out to others?
Both. We've had referrals come across from colleagues, and we've actually gone out and actually done sales. We've had sales efforts where we actually go out and get clients. We go to conferences. The best thing that you guys can do is actually, if you're creating your own business, just create your cards and go out there and just say, you actually do what you're doing. When I was studying for my LEED exam, it's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's how to build a green building. I was studying, and I said, I told myself, I can do this. I can actually be a consultant. So I said, I'm a lead consultant because I had passion, and I kind of, I studied it, and I knew what I was talking about a little bit. But whatever I didn't know, I could figure out later. I could say, yes, I'll do it, but I'll figure it out later. So you don't have to wait for all the answers. Just go out there and do it. Just like Nike says, just do it. And it works. It works. A lot of us kind of zombie into a job, and just kind of start working, and the next thing we're in a cubicle working in a padded cell. So find that passion and move forward. And the green industry is a great place to start because you don't have to just focus on buildings. You can focus on products, clothing, art, food. There's a lot of different areas you can go
I
into.
think that's probably a good question. Let's try and keep it brief for all you guys to address that. Whether, I don't know, Matt, if that's, well, yeah, actually your consultancy is starting to go on. Is it more you guys going out or people coming to you? I imagine it's a bit of both, but where do you find most of that traction coming from for your business development? We'll just again move right on down the line here.
Yeah, it's basically a combination of both. Obviously, as you first start out and you're a boutique company or firm, you're going to spend a lot of time marketing yourself and reaching out to the public. But as you gain momentum and traction, the referrals start coming in, and you're spending less time on the phone, less time chasing, and referrals is a huge source in this industry, in this business, especially for a consultant. Once you build that credibility with a client, they're willing to share that information with their colleagues and friends and other business owners, and there is a close network of communication between business owners and facility manager professionals. That they all talk to each other, so the word gets out very quickly, and what goes around comes around. So at first it's a lot of hard work, a lot of legwork, but it ultimately pays off in the end.
I kind of feel like it's probably going to be a lot of the same with you guys too. So just in the interest of getting some other questions, as soon as I asked, like, yeah, okay. So there were some hands up there. I meant over there.
I think she had her hand up.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Okay, you don't have your hand. Then you're next, and then you can ask your follow-up question, and then we'll just figure it out from there. Ask away.
What's the best way, or are there efficient strategies to figuring out whether the brands that we consume practice corporate responsibility?
Are you asking anyone in particular that question?
No, just the whole panel.
I'm not going to say too much. I think transparency is obviously key. I know that Mike, you talked, and Chris, you guys have talked about third-party verification. Kyle, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a number of resources that Good Guide, if you're familiar with that. In fact, I think they even have an app where you can zap the code in the store, and it'll pull up the information on your phones now. Don't quote me on that. I just heard about that, and it'll give you some metrics in terms of how they're good. CSR, Wire, Triple Hundred. There's a number of just websites that the Environmental Working Group out of DC. They have an entire thing on sunscreens. What's real, what's not. There's a lot of information out there online. I mean, it's overwhelming, but in specific to products, you can find some.
I think that's an important thing to understand. We don't lack for information. There's plenty of information out there. It's being able to figure out what to do with that information. I'm going to just shamelessly plug once again, Matt, this thing here, the Positive Plate. What I think is unique about it is that we have a profile for each restaurant, and we have 5 different categories that we define as comprehensive sustainability. And you can go and you can read exactly what each restaurant is doing in all 5 of these categories. One danger, I just watched a movie called In Organics We Trust, and I thought this was a really interesting quote. One of the farmers interviewed said that a danger of certification is that you just trust that certification and you don't do any legwork yourself. And then what ends up happening, we see this all the time, is that you can manipulate kind of the metrics in order to get the certification, when in reality maybe you're not living up to what that certification is supposed to stand for. So that's just something to think about.
Somebody said that kind of there's a mega trend right now going on with sustainability. But we've seen this kind of thing before, I think like in the 70s or so, and it died out. There was also the electric car that came about. There were plugs like in some here, but then that disappeared. So what makes you really feel like this is it? And yeah.
Chris, that was you that said that.
Well, I mean, I had alluded to some of the trends. It's not going to, I don't think it's a wave, okay? I think it's going to come in kind of phases, and it is going to take consumer demand to push. As Jesse indicated, the whole Clorox Greenworks thing, they started that in response to a consumer survey, and consumers had identified that household cleaners were their second most significant environmental concern, second only to automobiles. And that was the motivation for making that investment. And so it's going to take communication, but we're seeing the movements. You wouldn't have the big surge in the wind industry, right, that you saw. I mean, obviously it's lost some steam right now, but that wouldn't have gained such a significant place without some kind of momentum, that even though it was temporary. And it's gonna come in waves, but the level of investment in sustainable innovations has increased significantly. It's a hockey stick. As I mentioned, since 2007, $3.3 trillion has been spent, and that's I think the estimate to replace the whole infrastructure of the world, it costs like $25 trillion, I believe. Was an estimate I've heard. So it's a there's a lot of effort going into this, and as the economy recovers, we're only going to see more. So I hope that answers the question.
And with that economy, you're familiar with the peak oil, the theory behind it?
Heard of it.
So it's basically that we're on this curve of most of the easy liquid petroleum has already been extracted. And we're on a fast downward slope in terms of what resources are out there for that. And that obviously makes a lot of the world go around. A whole number of other economic issues behind that, currency, et cetera. But behind that commodity, you're going to start to see, $147 barrel, we're down to 85 right now, but you're going to start to see a lot more of this volatility. And I think that's going to force a lot of the sustainability. And like I said, it's probably going to come in waves. How to take care of this. Commodity prices, wheat and corn through the roof 3 years ago. We're in an economic collapse, but yet commodities across the rest of the world, because of inefficiencies and because of supply constraints and currency issues, there's spring risings and all sorts of other social unrest. And I think you're going to see a lot of stuff have to be addressed. There's only so much that can go around.
I think another thing to keep in mind too is we are the most aware consumers in the history of this planet. We do not, as we were saying just a minute ago, we don't lack for information. I think probably a little bump in the road is, what do we do with all this information? It's difficult. Another thing too, you mentioned in the 70s, products weren't very good in the 70s. The quote unquote green products, it was like, okay, well, this is just not very good. And now the equivalent sustainable product, which may be a little bit more money, is just as good, if not, especially looking at Matt's case with food, superior quality. And consumers are proving time and time again that they're happy to spend more money on a product so long as it isn't coming with reduced value or reduced quality. So it's a little bit different now at this point in time. I think Chris is right on the money. I mean, look at it. How much money is going into it?
I think, no, it's okay. I'll stop.
You sure? There was a hand over here. Yeah.
I actually have
two questions for separate panelists. My first question is kind of jumping off of that with the information. It's for the chef. I didn't catch your name.
Matthew.
Matthew. Okay. You were talking about educating yourself, and that's always been a common theme in our class. What did you, as a business person, do to educate yourself? What are some of the steps that you do to consciously educate yourself on the sustainability of your food, of implementing it into your recipes?
Great question. Very fortunate. You guys can hear me up there if I don't have the mic, yeah?
Yeah.
Fortunately enough, in hospitality, it's all about trends. Okay, if you're a chef or you're a business owner, you get to follow some trends, what's hot, and capitalize on some of that. As a chef and as a business owner in hospitality, you have to be very aware of the trends, what's happening, what your competition is doing, and in that you got to stay fresh, cutting edge, and in that it leans itself a little bit to in advance. You're seeing what your colleagues are doing, your competition is doing. You're in that arena where you can soak up some of that information, but you have to also be a go-getter. You have to want to know. There's a lot of chefs in the community that, you know, it's a very demanding work schedule. It's tough to do what we do. We work every holiday, all the weekends, you name it, we're there. So it's tough to also go above and beyond, ask questions, come and do wonderful things like this to continue and push yourself to be on Seafood Watch. He pulled this out of his wallet, okay? Download the app. It's those kind of things that are available to us now that you have to want to know. For me, it's all about sleeping at night. I like my sleep, right? But if I know that I'm not doing the right thing, shame on me. Then I don't sleep well. So for me, it's about getting a good night rest, as corny as that may sound.
With this question, is that a trend in terms of, do you think sustainability in terms of, as a chef, do you think that could move away with, you know, utilizing local growers and everything else, or do you think that is something that is here to stay?
I think it's definitely here to stay. I think that we've become, unfortunately, forgive me for saying so, an obese nation, and that we're over consumers. It's all about convenient food right now. It's about, I'm late, what can I grab that I can't even pronounce 70% of the ingredients in the bag to put in my body to give me enough energy till I can drink another Red Bull and then keep going. So do I think it's here to stay? Most definitely. It has to. I mean, we can only put this stuff in our bodies so long before we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and go, wow, man, how many people have cancer? How many people have all these ailments, you know? There's a very wise man once say, you know, all of us, we risk our health trying to earn all this money. And then we get to a point of our life where we spend all that money back going to the doctor. Right? So that's not sustainable in its ideology. So, yeah, I definitely think it's here to stay. It has to be.
Did you have a quick follow-up on that? Or for someone else?
Question for Mo. Actually, I wanted to know, you were talking about linear thinking and trying to move away from linear thinking in like the liberal sense. Oh, that's, you know, sustainability, that's liberal. What have you done when you're consulting your clients to help move them from a linear ideology?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of them have that linear ideology, and I had one client, I was talking to him in a hotel, and we were very conservative. He was saying, you know, what is this green expletive stuff that you're telling me about? I told him, well, let me explain it to you. Give me 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I'll explain that to you. And unfortunately, you do have to talk about money and why it's important, you know, financially. Otherwise, he's going to tune you out, and then that's it, you're done. So we got to lead with that. And then from that point on, now he's got your attention, you've built some credibility, you're talking about what makes sense to him or her, and then now you talk about the holistic part, you know, the healing part, the benefits it's going to provide once this individual takes their business and they market what they're doing to the public. The public starts seeing they're doing good things. And sometimes the public will ask. I mean, that young lady that was asking the question, you know, should I ask you know, are you using recycled soaps, or what are you doing here at this hotel? Ask away, you know, ask what they're doing, what their green policy is, ask what kind of recycled products they're using, what are they doing in the community, you know, how are they giving back? If you ask those questions, then that'll actually help drive demand. So we kind of help them think outside the box, you know, without sounding too cliche. And that's about it. And you know, I mean, if you look at Walmart, they're the biggest seller of organic products right now. So they're kind of moving out in that direction too. So it's going to keep moving forward.
You also, just to elaborate on that, during an initial client engagement, you have about 3 minutes to get their attention. And in the private sector, if you're not talking about increasing revenues or decreasing costs, you're going to lose it. You have about 3 minutes to do that.
I'll just tap in real quick to something that I've had some success with is finding value, right? We think of ROI, return on investment, as the immediate, most salient form of value, but there is other types of value like branding, which I think is huge, and I'm not going to go too much into that. But Mo's exactly right. When I was writing my questions down, I was like, Mo, I can't believe you didn't go into using that cost savings as that first step in. So I'm glad you asked the question to get into it. But there are other types of value beyond saving money in the here and now, right?
It just sounded like a major kind of through line or theme was sort of creating this consumer demand, which would, in my opinion, be through like civic engagement, getting people to care, getting people to want to be a part of the sustainable movement, sustainable development, sustainable business. So how, just in general, what do you think some ways, some pathways to getting society as a whole to care? You know, because that seems to be the biggest step forward.
I'm happy to answer that question if you guys have any answers.
Education.
Intellectual curiosity. I mean, what you care about matters. So voice it.
Yeah, I mean, changing people's behavior is, that's a big hurdle. And some of the more traditional ways to change people's behavior is you either have to charge them for it, incentivize it, penalize them for it, and you always have that voluntary component. But those are more drastic means to change behavior. But changing behavior is, I would teach a whole course on that. That's a good question, and it's something we think about. At least I do. I think about from a psychological standpoint of sustainability. I think that's a big area of interest and concern for all of us. It is the psychological part of it. We know the benefit is there, but how do we relate that? How do we transcend that and get other people to engage it? And it kind of goes back to that cultural aspect of sustainability, socioeconomic, environmental, cultural. You have to have, that's the engine, but in my humble opinion, that's the engine that drives it. So
I'm going to jump in on that because that's what our nonprofit does. That's our mission, is to figure out creative ways to educate the consuming public about their individual impacts that we all have. And I think Mike's right on the money with the culture. And I think that, you know, the way that I look at that is that's our ethical imperative, right? We want to push, I say an ethical imperative, but really it's a culture of understanding, a culture of positive impacts, if I'm going to use your terminology. And I think that, you know, I'll just flat out tell you, our strategy is really to model ourselves after the civil rights movement, which was pushed as an ethical imperative. It wasn't pushed as you'll save money. It wasn't pushed as you'll find value. It was pushed as this is the right thing to do. And we found that actually had incredible staying power. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm some like civil rights activist, because I'm not. And I'm not going to say that we've achieved what needs to be achieved because we have a black president, right? Because we haven't. But the reality is that was not wasted efforts, and we have come to a place where I think we can be fairly certain that we've attained quite a bit of the goals that have been set out in front of us. And I think that if the sustainability movement follows that ethical model, we'll have a lot more staying power. And then oddly enough, it's actually not odd at all, what we've found is that companies that have embraced diversity and civil rights, those are the most productive companies. Those are the companies that actually have the most profit.
on a fundamental scale, what our nonprofit does is we ply people with food and drinks and music to events where we then accidentally educate them. So there's an element of needing to make it enjoyable. And I'm serious about that. This can't be the dour, gotta fix it, and live in the trees and eat figs and wear loincloths. That's just not... Well, it could be fun, I suppose, but I mean, it's the reality is we have certain sets of expectations that we need to maintain on some kind of level. And we need to be able to show people that their quality of life is not going to decrease, that it's actually going to increase.
The question I was going to ask is related to that. And Chris, you had spoken about diagnostic tools that you use to establish baselines, which I have separate questions about, but I'll save those for after. But I do wonder if there are components of the tools that address the behavioral aspects of waste or measures that can be taken towards sustainability.
So that's interesting. The tools that we're using, it's more of a snapshot. And then the follow-up is a proposal for initiatives that will address those. Now, actually, though, from the fundamental environmental audit, what's initially generated are strictly behavioral, zero-cost things that they can employ to achieve immediate reductions in say, energy and water consumption. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of the step one is the behavioral stuff. But that's like having a chef that likes to keep the ovens on 24/7 and convincing him that it's okay to turn them off for 10 hours when nobody's in the kitchen.
Which happens in offices all the time where people leave their printers on all night long. You have a question, Nora?
Yeah, so a few years ago, my mom was saying that she wanted to give us all $500 and invest differently. Me and my brothers would be opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how we'd want to invest. And so I was wondering, are there sort of like major studies that people actually try? I know I've heard some things about like socially, responsible investments or environmental investments versus non, and like they say they're generally can be equal. I think I've heard that once, but I was wondering what your opinion is on that, or what if I wanted to invest, would it be okay?
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion, and conventional wisdom is that you leave money on the table, you're screening out things that are extremely profitable, and you're not going to get a comparable return, say, versus the S&P 500. That's not true, and it just goes to, again, like I meant, a number of different things. The decision-making process, the investment process, and what they're invested in. Because you can go and get, KLD is an ETF that followed, kind of the leaders in the space were Kinderly Lindbergh and Ian Donovan. And now it's owned by MSCI, which is Morgan Stanley Capital International. So even the big boys have kind of got their hands around the throat on what social and sustainable investment is. But it's not true, and if you put yourself in one of those indexes, you'll actually probably end up outperforming. Studies have shown over the last kind of 15 years. I mean, that's a very small window,
right?
And the space is still somewhat nascent. 30 years old, maybe. I mean, even though it goes back to the Old Testament in terms of what this stuff is, but that those numbers actually are outperforming in terms of, because they are, as Jesse was describing, some of the most profitable businesses are treating their employees the best, are providing a safe work environment. They're getting more productivity out of their employees.
Less lawsuits.
Also, yeah, I mean, there's a number of different aspects of it, having environmental stewardship. So, and then there's, if it's long term and you're not worried about other aspects of it, either a number of mutual funds. Go to Green Journal, and that has like kind of a list of a number of the mutual funds. SRI Connect. There's just type in sustainable or social responsible investing, and you'll get enough in terms of the fund families.
Right here in front.
I have a question here in the middle. So in what ways can you give hope or wise advice to a community that has limited resources or no resources at all? To become one of the stakeholders. Sorry, my voice is kind of Well,
other communities, if they have limited resources, what would advice would you give them?
If limited resources, other communities as compared to what?
I'm asking like how, like what type of steps can you give a community that has limited resources and becoming more sustainable?
You know, even if a community has very limited resources, they're still consuming, right, in some way. And whenever you're consuming, you have a voice and you have power. And to look at a geography, a neighborhood, you know, that's like treat it like an ecosystem. Can you have community gardens? Can you? There are numerous subsidies available to low-income communities to have technology, state-of-the-art renewable energy technologies. So there are lots of opportunities to embrace sustainability regardless of the neighborhood.
That's kind of the question of the night, to be honest, because so much of the world doesn't have access to the kinds of resources that we take for granted. And I think that's really where you see a tremendous struggle. I'm reading a book right now on the history of Haiti, partly because we're doing a project there, and it blows my mind, the metaphors with sustainability. And I teach a class on the social component of sustainability through the extension here. And I think I'm going to make that a required text because it so clearly delineates the history of what's put Haiti to where they are. And there is no community in terms of on a national scale in the Western Hemisphere that is, you know, dealing with things the way Haitians are having to deal with them. And it's a tough question she asked you, man, because it's like it is really hard, you know. But there are
Aboriginal peoples. They're the most sustainable peoples. Our native populations are the most sustainable populations there are. So and they're effectively working or were living outside of any current economy. And so
which could be
it's almost
argued.
like you're, what's that?
Well, I'm sorry, it could be argued that they're richer in that sense. You know
Absolutely.
What I mean? Because
No, I mean, the American lifestyle standard is what so much of the rest of the world is trying to emulate, and therein lies our demise.
Right.
And if they can recognize the value of their own heritage, their own societies, and embrace the simpler aspects, just like I think many Americans are trying to embrace the Native American cultures, and which is just take what you need and respect and restore whenever you can. So
yeah, the third world sustainability is a means of survival.
Yeah. I think covering that baseline of the hierarchical needs there.
I mean, isn't it important to go back to food, go back to growing food locally? I mean, that creates jobs, it creates a food supply, it creates a sense of community. There's something romantic about it. You know, you're getting to know your neighbors. I mean, a lot of times we don't even know our neighbors, and we'll be living in a place for 3 years, not see anyone. So, if we can, if you're living in a close community or a low-income community, start doing some food in the backyard.
You asked a question that could really be its own class, to be honest. And I would say that probably, even though you didn't ask me, I'm still going to talk. One of the most fundamental components is getting buy-in from the local people. And I'm so glad that you talked about community gardens, because one of the projects that we're doing in Haiti is it's aquaponics, which is essentially it's gardening. It's just you raise fish, the fish poop is awesome fertilizer, and then you're growing plants that people can eat and fish that they can eat, right? But if you don't have the local people's support and buy-in and investment, and that doesn't mean that they have to be paying money so much as it means that they have to be working on the project, then you'll get buy-in, and then that actually does something, because in low-income communities, there can be a sense of despondency and despair, and to pull them in to being able to where they can have, you know, I'm going to correct myself. I don't necessarily mean pull them in, like do what I tell you and this is how it works, but like, hey, what do you guys need, right? We don't ask that question nearly often enough. You know, and so when we have sustainability projects taking place in low income or you know, communities that don't have access to much, we have to listen to their needs from their mouths, from, you know, their place of honesty, and then have them take as maximum amount of investment as they can possibly have in order to be able to build something. And I think community gardens is a great start on that kind of thing, especially when you look at food deserts and all that fun stuff.
I have one more question. So like, I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but like, if we continue to like in America, if we continue to use all the resources, we're obviously gonna become like a low income type of area if we continue that. But like, if we took the people, like if we took ourselves out of the situation and like taking away fast foods or like convenience stores, stuff like that, clothing, all that we take for granted, like, you think that would help change our environment? Like, if we took all the things that we take for granted and that we don't necessarily need, it's more of wants, if we took that away, like, it would kind of, like, I don't know, would that help more?
Well, I think ultimately we have to become fascinated with a simpler lifestyle, with not to continually chase possessions for the sake of having possessions, right? And so I think a lot of what you're suggesting is valid, would be to the benefit of a society.
And 71% of our gross domestic product is consumption. 71%.
How's that compare with other countries, do you know?
Does it matter? It's just, it's
I don't know.
not that
Seemed like
high.
a question, actually.
It's just, yeah, no, it's not that high, especially in many parts of the world today. I mean, you know, you've got a middle class, it's sort of a middle class in China that's kind of the next great big growth boom in India, which are very different in terms of how their demographics work, but that's what everybody's kind of banking on in terms of growth, which in and of itself is not really sustainable. Like you're saying, it's just, you can't continue to grow and utilize this much resources and put that much into the air without consequences. So I think that's also why sustainability is so important. But the rest of it's like, you know, business and government spending, but we consume, that's what we do.
We're good at it. How are we doing with time? I mean, it's like
We should take- yeah,
people are
we just
into
take,
it.
like,
I don't know how it works, but
They take 2 more, maybe 2 as well.
Okay,
The-
so-
the hands that are up right now are the last questions. How about that?
yeah. So you haven't asked a question yet, or have you?
This is for whoever thinks we can answer best. You mentioned greenwashing. What are some typical things to look out for that businesses will do to make themselves appear more sustainable than they actually are?
Well, some of the things that I alluded to was a lack of transparency, lying, right? Lying.
You know they're lying.
There's trade-offs. There's lots of ways to do it. And I use the term gaming the system because there's lots of ways to game it, to not be transparent, to not consider the trade-offs, to be vague and obscure. There's just so many ways to game it. And that just comes from my experience working in the renewable energy industry, where there's lots of ways to game that type of offer to a client. So, and hence the distinction between, in that particular industry, between the commercial industry and the residential industry is in the commercial industry, you have to have guaranteed performance clauses, which kind of eliminates greenwashing. Whereas in the residential sector, there are no guaranteed performance clauses. So there's more room for greenwashing. So that's just kind of one example, a specific example of how greenwashing is used in the renewable energy industry between commercial and residential. But there's lots of ways to game it. So those are just the major categories of gaming the system in greenwashing.
Also, if you can measure it, if you can add numbers really don't lie. So if somebody's claiming, well, we've reduced 2,000 tons of greenhouse gases because we took down our lights and we put in more efficient air conditioning systems, you can look at their bills, ask to see their bills and to show the proof. I mean, if they did reduce those costs, then their bill's going to go down, or you're going to see less kilowatt hours, right? So a company should be transparent and actually should show that to the public. Another example, real quick, of greenwashing is there's an Arrowhead plastic bottle and it says eco-friendly cap, less plastic, 30% less plastic. I mean, it's still plastic, so it's like saying organic crack. So,
Yeah, like what was that? Will you tell me that story about the Ethos water? Will you tell me about how they give like 50% of profits to? Well, they were never profitable. The upper brass was extracting all the capital out of the company. So there was really no money going anywhere.
There's a lot of wordplay.
The rolling break even in accounting, it's wonderful. You guys are making a ton of money.
Recyclable. Anything's recyclable. I would say something is getting CSR, corporate social responsibility. A lot of times, I mentioned earlier how that just seems to be used interchangeably in a lot of businesses with sustainability. It's easy to tell a nice little story that kind of diverts your attention away. Look at the ads that you'll see from oil companies right now. They talk a lot about job creation. They talk a lot about community development in certain places, and they'll tell isolated stories that kind of divert your attention away from the oil spill or the trees that are cut down or the way that the indigenous people that they displaced in the Amazon or something like that. So it takes some vigilance on your part, but I think that one is particularly frustrating to me because Mo said, and he's absolutely right, we tend to measure sustainability in terms of quantifiable metrics, which is super for carbon, but it's not so good for social impacts, right? Like education or medical care or civil conflict or forced migration. And you think about, supply chain management and where our products come from. We're 5% of the world's population. We consume 30% of the world's resources. Not very much of what we consume comes from this country. So we have an impact in every corner of the globe. So those impacts extend well beyond our carbon footprint, well beyond that. And so if we want to try and see ways in which companies are affecting the social component, it becomes a lot messier, and it requires a bit more vigilance on our part.